Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the best books I ever hated. And the purpose of this video is not to disparage any of these books, but rather to celebrate the fact that sometimes you can read a book and actively dislike everything about it while also appreciating that it was either very well written, very well constructed, is just generally a book that you know will appeal to a wide variety, a wide audience, but just not you. I'm sure we've all had those experiences. I would really love to hear about any of the books that you have very much disliked, but also could recognize that they were obviously very well done. For me, at least, if I dislike something and I think that it's not well done, it's most likely just going to be deleted from my memory. There are definitely books I go back, I look at my reading journal, I look at Goodreads, and I just don't remember that I ever picked them up at all. I'm like, man, I have to look at the summary because I genuinely don't know what the book is about anymore. But there are some books where I remember the experience so vividly years, decades after I have read them. And it is because they stuck with me. They were well done enough that the characters are vivid, the settings are vivid, but the experience was torturous. And I think part of that is also because we associate memory with emotion. If something impacts you in a very strong way, whether positive or negative, you're going to remember it. But for whatever reason, these are 4 books that have very much stuck with me that I disliked, but can understand why some people in particular, or even most people, might really enjoy them. There's a couple of different genres here, a wide mix of books, and ones that I am pretty excited to talk about, because sometimes it's really nice to talk about the things that you don't like, especially if you're not bashing the author, right? I personally, I don't like to speak badly of someone's writing, of the way that they put together a book, because it makes me feel bad for them. But here I can be like, you know what? Hated this. Good book, great job, just not for me. And I have one of these books present. I have it right here. And I'm talking about this one first because this might be the book that I hated reading the most of any book that I've read in my entire life. And that is A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. So this is a book that was written in 1969, in the 1960s, so where the author passed away in 1969, and was published posthumously by his mother and won the 1981 Pulitzer Prize for fiction. So unfortunately, the author did not live to see this book published, to see it go on and succeed, which is very sad. He spent the end of his life attempting to get this book published and was unable to see it through. And so it was published by his family, by his mom afterward, and went on to garner great acclaim. I picked this up, I think just from a list. I think I had found it on one of those Time's Best 100 Books of All Time lists. Didn't know what it was about, picked it up, thought I was gonna love it, and I was wrong. This is an American tragicomedy is how it's often described. It's a satirical book that is focused on the main character, Ignatius J. Reilly. And that name is burned into my brain forever. I will forever remember the name Ignatius J. Reilly because he has to be the most frustrating, loathsome main character that I have ever read. And he is so well written because I don't think that you could hate a character as much as I hate this character without them being well written. The author has to be able to do that in order to bring out those emotions, in me anyway. And I thought there's a really good description of Ignatius in the foreword to this book. So the foreword is written by Walker Percy, and he describes Ignatius. So he says, Ignatius himself, intellectual, deadbeat, goof-off, glutton, who should repel the reader with his gargantuan bloats, his thunderous contempt, and one-man war against everybody. And that sums him up so well. He is a main character that actively loathes the world around him. So the main character, Ignatius, much like the author, John Kennedy Toole, was a medievalist. So in this book, he has his master's in medieval history, and he believes that humanity peaked in the Dark Ages. So he believes that it's just been a slow descent since then, and that, much as the title suggests, he is the one true brain, the one true mind who is surrounded by idiots, essentially. So the title of the book is taken by a quote by Jonathan Swift. So, when a true genius appears in the world, you may know him by this sign, that all the dunces are in confederacy against him. And that is exactly how Ignatius feels in this book. He is a young man who believes himself to be an intellectual, who is kind of aimless in life. We follow him as he is unemployed, living with his mother, actively hating the people around him, and trying to find gainful employment. So he goes out and tries a variety of jobs, does not do very well, surprising no one, because he cannot get along with anybody and cannot acknowledge that anybody might be doing something right. And it's just this tragic, farcical look into one man's life. It is a very rambling, character-focused book. There's not a lot of plot here. It is focused on the ridiculousness of Ignatius's life. It talks, it has a lot to say about intellectualism and social relationships and communication, and it is funny, right? There are parts, and even when I was actively hating it and reading it and so seething as I turned each page, being like, I hate Ignatius, I hate this, but I don't want to stop it. It is really funny. And I think that John Kennedy Toole accomplished what he wanted to accomplish in this book. Obviously, many people agree. As I said, it won the Pulitzer Prize. It was not for me. I will never read this again, but I haven't been able to part with it. So, obviously I have a lot of books in this library. I don't love them all the same amount, but I don't think that I could ever part with this. It was such an intense reading experience. It is something that I will always remember. I loathed it, but I'm really glad that I read it. And like I said, it'll stick with me for the rest of my life. Ignatius in his green hunting cap is burned into my memory. So if any of you have a book like that where it's just, you did not enjoy the experience, but you know that you will never forget it, for me, that book is Confederacy of Dunces. On a similar vein, I do not have a copy of this book because I picked it up from the library, and I remember everything about the experience of reading this next book. I picked it up at the library. I read it in the summer between years of university. I can remember the way that the library binding, that plastic binding they put on their books, felt against my fingers. It was just, again, a reading experience that is burned into my memory. And that is The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner. I don't know if this is assigned reading or it required reading for high school students in the United States, but if it is, I empathize. My sympathies go out to you, because if I had had to read this for high school, being the perfectionist that I was, it would have made me even angrier, because I would have not only had to read it, but reread it and dissect it. And I just would have not, I would have been very upset about that experience. So I'm glad that I only had to read it one time and try to forget about it, even though I really haven't forgotten about it. So for anybody who has not read it, The Sound and the Fury is William Faulkner's fourth book. It was published in 1929. It did not win, as far as I know. I don't think it won any of the major literary prizes on its own, but is widely regarded as one of the main reasons that Faulkner was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1949. So it is highly regarded as part of his general literary canon, widely regarded as one of his best books. And it is, I think, an important work of modern American literature. It is very experimental. It plays with a lot of things that were up and coming at that time, like stream of consciousness, which most people associate with James Joyce or Ulysses, but it has that stream of consciousness, that very immediate kind of emotional writing. I don't know if the rest of Faulkner's writing is like that, because to be quite honest, I read The Sound and the Fury and then said, maybe this is not for me. If you have a Faulkner book to recommend, please recommend it, because I would like to read something else by him. But this was an experience that put me off reading the rest of his books for life, apparently. But it centers around a Southern family, or a family that lives in the Southern United States that is in, the process of decay. Their family is in shambles. They're kind of rotting from the core. And I think all of the point of views come from siblings in the family. So they're the brothers and then one sister. And all of the brothers' point of views also kind of relate to the sister and some events that are happening in her life and how those events are affecting everybody else. What I remember most strongly about this book is that the first part, so the first section of the book, is narrated by one of the brothers who has an intellectual disability. And this is where that very intense stream of consciousness comes in. So Faulkner's intention, or at least what I assume it was his intention here, was getting us to live inside this character's head. So it's very emotive writing. So it's kind of going from past to present. You feel the emotions, this kind of rush of feelings, thoughts. all tumbling out, like I said, in this stream of consciousness, which I think, is a very evocative experience. I did not enjoy it. I guess I just like a little more cohesion. I have not read Ulysses. I don't know that I ever will. I think I will. It's on that list of like books to read before you die, and I'm sure I will attempt it. But I cannot imagine that I will enjoy it very much because I did not like this, and I believe it will be similar. So if you are someone who really enjoys that style, please tell me why. Because maybe I can, with understanding and empathy, maybe will come acceptance and I will be able to approach these books in a different way. But I think for books like this, The Sound and the Fury, for example, I think is a book that it's one of those experiences where you say, if you don't like it, people are going to say, well, you just didn't get it. You just didn't understand it. And I'm never going to sit here and be like, I understand everything that William Faulkner was trying to say. I do not know everything. I do not understand everything. But I think I at least understand enough about what he was trying to do to acknowledge it, to appreciate it, and to say, I'm very sorry, but this is not for me. And I think that's really where I'm getting with The Sound and the Fury. An excellent book that I really hated. So please, if you've read it, let me know how you felt about it. And I would just like to hear it. After that, the next book on the list is a work of fantasy. So the only work, well, I guess we'll call it sci fantasy. So this is the only work of science fiction / fantasy on the list, and that is Pierce Brown's Dark Age. This is the 5th book in the Red Rising series. And this is a bit of a different experience. So I think we can dislike books for a number of reasons. Sometimes when a book is very popular, I think what gets people or what might make them feel that sense of disappointment is anticipation. So if you are waiting for a book to come out for a long time, if you have built a book up to be something incredible, amazing in your mind, if you've heard a lot of people talk about a book and talk about how much they loved it, how excited they were to read it, it was 5 stars, best book of the year, favorite book of the year, and then you read it and you don't have that experience, I think the disappointment can compound and that you can end up disliking it even more than you would have had you not heard anything about it at all. And I think that was certainly part of the experience with me and Dark Age by Pierce Brown. So this is the 5th novel in the Red Rising series. I'm not going to talk about what happens in it because it is the 5th book in a series. But I will say that there is a distinct tonal shift in Dark Age. Red Rising is a sci fantasy series that is very fast-paced, very plot-driven, but it does have good characters. At least I think it has good characters that you like, that you get attached to. But it is brutal, right? It's a dystopian world. There's war, there's death, there's violence. And that's all true in the first 3 books of the series. But just the way that they play out feels more like an adventure kind of sci-fantasy to me, versus the shift that happens in this second series of books. And with Dark Age specifically, it becomes, I think, a much slower paced, politically based, almost grimdark science fantasy. And that is something that I like, but it is not something that I had been getting from the Red Rising series. And so when I got that in Dark Age and it felt so different from the rest of the books, I didn't really like it. It wasn't what I wanted. I wanted this high octane, fuel injected, exciting book. And that's not what I got. I got this kind of meandering, some scenes. Now, don't get me wrong, Pierce Brown is excellent at action. The way that his stories come together are still really good. I remember reading the ending of Dark Age and really loving it. But it wasn't like that the whole way through. It was a really big book and the pacing was more erratic and I was not prepared for that. So of all the books on this list, I think perhaps Dark Age would benefit the most from a reread, because I think going in with measured expectations would help me appreciate those parts of the book a little bit more. As I was reading it the first time, it felt kind of dark for the sake of darkness. It was pushing the envelope in a way that the other books had not. It was turning into something very different, and I didn't expect that, and I didn't know if enough groundwork had been laid for it to feel earned or to feel natural to me. And I do wonder if after the series has concluded, if I go back and I reread it, if I might feel differently. But for now, I'll just say that it was a book that was my most anticipated book of that year, and I ended up really disliking the reading experience, and that still colors my experience of that book to this day. So unfortunately, even though Dark Age is, I think, one of the most popular Red Rising books, I think it has probably the highest or one of the highest Goodreads ratings. I know that people loved it the year that it came out. I did not have that experience. And now we'll get into the very last book on this list. And this one is very different. So this is the only memoir that ended up on this list. And I will say, in all fairness to this book, memoir is not a genre of book that I pick up often. I am a psychiatrist. I spend all of my time at work listening to people about their lives, about the things that have happened, often listening to things that are very sad and very difficult. And so when I read for pleasure, that's not what I'm looking for. I don't need to know about other people's lives. I don't care to know about more people's lives. I think I get a lot of that, and I want to move away from that a little bit and read something that's totally different, something immersive, something I can step into. And so for me to read a memoir, it's usually because a lot of people are talking about it. Educated, for example. And in this case, the book that ended up on this list is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado, I think is her name, the author. I did have it written down, but it flew right out of my brain. But this is a memoir that was published in 2019. And when I first started watching BookTube, it was a book that a lot of people were talking about for a number of different reasons. So this was a memoir written by a woman who had been in a same-sex relationship. I think she categorizes that as a WLW, or women loves women relationship, sapphic relationship, whatever terminology you want to use. She was in a same-sex relationship and had experienced at the hands of a previous partner domestic abuse and violence. And I think the way that she described her memoir was that it was, I wish I could remember the exact phrase she used, because it was an excellent phrase. I don't know if she called it archival silence, but she was talking about filling a place in the literary canon or the human archive, the written word, to talk about a topic that was not talked about or written about very often. And that was domestic violence and same-sex relationships. And so I thought before reading it, I thought while I was reading it, and I even think now that this is a very important book. It was covering a topic that was obviously intensely personal, a topic that's very important, something that we need a record of, because if we don't write about things, if we don't share about experiences, then we have gaps in history. We have gaps in knowledge. We have gaps in understanding. And it's hard for people to know or understand or empathize when they don't realize that something is a problem or something is an issue. And so I thought that it was a very important book, and I really was primed, I think, to like it. I really wanted to enjoy it. And while I did appreciate the structure and the construction of this book, it's very unique. The author writes in second-person point of view, and each section of the novel focuses on a different literary trope and how that played out in her life, and it kind of all weaves together. So it's part memoir, part kind of literary deconstruction, part experience of horror as a genre and how that can kind of relate and seep into everyday life. And it was very well done. It just was very much not for me. And I did go back and reread my Goodreads review because I wanted to remind myself of all of the things that I disliked about this and why. Because even again, as I was thinking back on it, I was like, man, this is a book that I should really like, that I thought I was going to really like. Why didn't I? And in my Goodreads review, which by the way were much better in 2019 than they are in 2026, I had said about this book that it felt a little bit like I have an MFA, hear me roar, which is not a super nice statement. I felt a little bit bad after reading that, but it was just very much the style that the book was written in was, it seemed very technically proficient, but very much like someone who had been taught to write a certain way. It sounded very flowery, very, like I said, very elevated. But to me, it didn't feel like it flowed naturally. It felt very intentional. And that is not something that everybody dislikes. I personally, when I'm reading something, don't want to feel the hand of the author, as it were, behind the words. I don't want to read a sentence and know or or feel like I know how the author felt while reading it, which is why I avoid memoirs, right? Because I think it's very difficult to read a memoir and not get some sense of that, because a memoir is in effect someone pouring themselves out onto a page because they believe that that experience is worth sharing. And I do believe that this experience was worth sharing. I just didn't enjoy the experience of reading it. And I think a lot of that had to just do with style as opposed to anything else. It was not the topic, it was not the execution, it was not the construction of the novel, it was the style of the writing. And I think that is very much just one of those things that either works or it doesn't. There are some types of prose that I will pick up and I'll think, oh my gosh, this is beautiful. And then I'll go and I'll look and somebody else will say, this is so flowery and over the top, it was ridiculous. Or I'll read something and I'll really like it, like Hemingway, for example. And so many people will read it and think, oh my gosh, this is so boring. This is so dry. This is so sparse. I can't get into it. And so that is one of those kind of incredibly subjective experiences when you are reading. And I think that was very much what it was here in The Dream House. It was just something that was an interesting topic and did not work for me for that reason. But I do know that when I first came onto BookTube, into the BookTube scene, a lot of people were reading and really, really loving this book. So I think if there's one on this list that people are really going to enjoy, I think that overwhelmingly it probably would be this one. But that's it. Those are the 4 books that I wanted to chat about. I would love to hear if there are books that you've had similar experiences with where you actively disliked or even loathed reading them, but you could appreciate that the author was accomplishing something with the work. If you've read any of these books, please let me know. Did you love them? Did you hate them? I would love to hear about it. And I will see you with another video soon. Bye.